Albemarle organization for our Tuesday, December 6th, 4 p.m. evening. Hope everybody is dry and warm. And the first item here, because number 2 matters from the public. And do we have anyone here that wishes to speak today? I see one taker. We have one taker. Okay, please come forward and state your name, and you will have 3 minutes to address the board. And the owls or the microphones are just a good point to remind everyone to make sure you use an outside voice so that those online participating can hear what we're saying.
Thank you. That does look like an owl.
It's called now.
I know, yes. Hello, Mr. Owl. Good evening, Policy Board, fellow planners and advocates. My name is Peter Kress from the Piedmont Environmental Council. For 50 years, PC has been a voice for well-planned communities and intelligent transportation solutions across our 9-county region. We've supported smart scale since its adoption, and we think it's an important tool because it uses data instead of, frankly, politics to decide which transportation project should happen. Like many of you, we are concerned about the cost estimates of the latest round of applications from the Charlottesville, Albemarle MPO area. Frankly, they're shocking and in some cases double what we had expected. Take, for example, the MPO's 5th Street multimodal proposal, which is actually a fairly modest project. Between inflation and various contingencies, the cost is nearly double what we had expected. Projects of such modest ambition as this shouldn't cost $45 million a mile. I'm not sure how we're going to do transportation planning if that's the new reality. I mentioned inflation and contingency together because they are related in some interesting ways, and there may actually be a bit of a loop of uncertainty created between the two forms of uncertainty. Clearly, we're in an inflationary environment. I watched the CTB presentation and I understand the reasons. And I know enough about economics to be dangerous, but I will say that these numbers appear to be worst case. We might just have to wait and see, but I really hope this grim scenario does not become some kind of new normal in the area. The contingency numbers are also wild, sometimes approaching 50%. This doesn't really reflect a very high confidence in the underlying estimates. Projects certainly vary, but at least as of today, the Smart Scale portal was reporting that most projects in our residency are actually on budget. It'll be interesting to see the statewide numbers and how this all shakes out. If we're subject to this degree of handicapping, it goes without saying that same standard needs to apply across all districts. I look forward to seeing the full discussion beginning in 2023 and what happens next. Perhaps there could be a re-examination of the formulas or some kind of positive hedge, such as a wait list in case things actually go better than we expect. In the meantime, I also look forward to watching your own deliberations and hearing the update about Smart Scale at this presentation. And I always appreciate your steadfast work to make the community better for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, any other speakers? Thank you. We will close matters from the public. And that will take us to item number 3. This is the review and acceptance of the agenda. Do we have any changes to be made to the agenda today?
Mr. Galloway, as you may recall, Mr. Myers is not able to join us today. So unfortunately, I was up there. Actually, it is a CTV meeting today, so obviously there and hopes to join us in January.
So that is number 5 on the agenda. We will remove that. Thank you, sir. Any other changes or to the agenda? Is there a motion to approve as amended?
Second.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Approved, thank you. And then we also have the September 28th, 2022 meeting minutes. Any changes or edits needed to those after mentions review?
I'll second that.
All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved, thank you. And that will take us to number 4. We have the appointment of the officer nomination committee, which we do every January. Sandy, you want to give some brief overviews on that?
Yeah, this is just an appointment for the slate of policy board members who will recommend officers for the for consideration for to serve in January. Traditionally, just as an FYI, there's been an alteration back and forth between the city and the county serving as the chair and vice chair. So currently, Mr. Galloway from Albemarle County is serving as the chair. So traditionally, it would be the city's turn to serve as chair next. But I reached out to a few people, Mr. Reed and Ms. Monteith and Mr. Nelson have all agreed to serve as a nominee. If Mr. Galloway would like to formally.
Instead of trying to hold my iron grip on power. Very good. Does that take an action of the board, or we just gonna make it?
You just get to, you get to exude your iron power right there. So you get to be so.
It took till December of my brain. Is there any objections to the nomination? Folks being appointed to the nomination committee? All right, you are so appointed. Thank you.
I urge you to call Ms. Kingston. Because it's his turn.
Telegram.
I turn it one finger here.
Out of the frying pan, what happened?
So that will take us past number 5, which we removed, and into number 6, which is one of our first presentations, the title 6 plan. And Ms. Shannon will be handling that one today. Good afternoon.
I'm just gonna share my screen.
You know, while you're doing it, do we do a roll call here?
We did not do it today.
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and do that, just so we got for the record, who's here or not here, for those listening.
Sure. Ms. Mallett?
Yes.
Mr. Galloway?
Yes.
Sorry, supervisors. Councilor Kingston?
Yes.
Mayor Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Nelson?
Yes.
Ms. Longbreed? Yes. Mr. Reed?
Here.
Ms. Monteith? Mr. Williams?
Online.
He's on mute.
Yes.
Mr. Williams is on that. Mr. Hudson? Get off there, Mr. Long? Mr. Condor?
Here.
Also online. And Ms. Jacobs? Here.
So the Title VI implementation plan for the Metropolitan Planning Organization needed to be updated. And we decided to make a Title VI plan that covers all of the federally funded programs for the TJPDC. So one of the changes, the updates, was that it's now the TJPDC Title VI implementation plan as opposed to just the MPO. We made substantial changes to this plan according to some of the updates and requirements. And the purpose of the TJPDC's Title VI implementation plan is to describe the measures that the TJPDC adopts to ensure compliance with the Title VI Act of 1964, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, or national origin. And the plan applies to the Charlottesville MPO and several other TJPDC programs. So the TJPDC is the contractual administrator for the Charlottesville Albemarle MPO, and it's also the administrator for the Charlottesville Regional Home Consortium and several other programs that are listed on the slide. The updates to the TJPDC implementation plan include posting the Title VI implementation plan on the TJPDC and MPO websites, including non-discrimination notices with our contracting materials when we contract programs out, including offers for interpretation and translation services with public notices and public meetings. We updated the complaint form and developed procedures that would help the person filling out the complaint form understand the process that we go through with the complaint if we receive a form. And we posted those on the website, and we posted notices in the office of the TJPDC in a public area, notifying people of those options. So per the MPO engagement plan, the TJPDC had a public comment period for 15 days, which is the requirement, from October 24th to November 15th. The draft plan was announced publicly and shared with the TJPDC staff, the MPO technical committee. It was emailed to community stakeholders, posted in social media, posted in the TJPDC office and the Water Street Center, and on the website. And we also translated the announcements into Spanish and Farsi, and there were no public comments received. It's kind of a dry plan. So the staff recommends that the policy board vote to approve the use of the updated Title VI, TJPDC Title VI implementation plan for the Charlottesville Albemarle Metropolitan Planning Organization. And also VDOT has approved of them.
Questions, comments?
I'm sorry, what did you just say? VDOT has?
So yeah, VDOT reviewed and approved the plan.
So one question, it said that the chief operating officer is the one that saw that for the PDC, but then it said work with the managers through TJPDC or the VDOT Civil Rights Committee.
Management programs to make sure they're implementing Title VI within the agency or any federally funded
So
programs.
somebody holds that kind of responsibility for each program.
Is this something that's done every 5 years kind of thing, or?
Yeah, I think it's every 3 years it will be updated. Typically, the updates are looking at the demographics for the area and understanding if there is a large percentage of non-English speaking populations that are affected by our programs. And if they are, then we work to translate, to have extra outreach and to translate the materials for them into their language.
I missed earlier, so it was on the coordinator page. You list out the type, so it's made. Great, any other questions or comments? The motion's on the screen, if someone would like to make that motion.
I move to approve the use of the updated TJPDC Title VI implementation plan, the Charlottesville Albemarle Metropolitan Planning Organization.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that is approved. All right, the next item, number 6, Regional Transit Vision Plan and Governance Study, and Shannon, you are still on.
So who here has not seen the Regional Transit Vision Plan presentation? Okay.
That's why we asked.
Won't be seen.
Yeah. Yeah. So we did the plan. It was a 28-month plan, $350,000, and it was supported by DRPT, the City of Charlottesville, and Albemarle County. We did a lot of public engagement. We came up with 2 service networks, the unconstrained and the constrained. We have a final report. One of the metrics that we looked at was the access to jobs, which also is access to shopping and other amenities, because people jobs go with the places people shop. So there's the baseline, the constraint would increase accessibility by transit by 33%, and the unconstrained would increase by 140%. And then the next steps are to do the transit governance study, to communicate and organize around a regional authority, long-term planning coordination between land use and transportation, help the transit agencies find more drivers, implement guidelines and track service improvements, and build consensus around bus rapid transit corridor improvements. So based on those recommendations, we started the regional transit governance study for Region 10. Yeah, I know. Who here has not seen a presentation about the governance study?
This is with the consultants. There was one that was online, I heard, was able to get on that one.
Okay.
I would like to go into the slides briefly.
Okay, yeah, so this study is building on previous studies. So there's the Transit Authority study in 2009. And then there was legislation passed in, the study was in 2008. In 2009, the General Assembly passed legislation for a transit authority for the region. However, it was not funded. There was no funding mechanism. And then the Regional Transit Partnership formed in 2017, which also was kind of like a precursor to an authority. And in 2022, we had the Albemarle Transit Expansion Study and the Regional Transit Vision 10. So we're kind of building multiple studies, and we've talked with other authorities in the region or in the state, and they take about 10 years to form. So we're right on track. So the study goals are to, I'm sorry, what slide is that? 2? Slide 8. Okay, got it. To develop 2 service scenarios. That's not it. Sorry. Well, the study goals are to develop a mechanism for bringing in revenue for transit services, and then governing that revenue and being accountable for that revenue, and having it be something that the region would feel comfortable with, and enough to enable some kind of additional revenue source for transit. So the approach of the study is we had a kickoff meeting, and we're working on existing conditions. So we're looking at how transit is governed right now, how we make decisions around funding for transit, and the accountability for that funding. And then we'll do a peer regional transit study and look at how other regions are making decisions around transit and bringing in additional revenue and managing it. We'll look at potential revenue sources for our area and what works for our area, and come up with a list of sources, and work with the region, like the stakeholder committee, which represents the regional jurisdictions, to form some sort of consensus around the potential revenue generation mechanism. And then we'll develop a scenario of governance and funding allocations, like a system to allocate those funds based on, again, working with the jurisdictions to make sure that there's agreement and consensus on that. And then there'll be a recommendation from the consultants. So will be extensive stakeholder engagement to make sure that we can build a consensus. The steering committee is representatives from each of the jurisdictions from Region 10. And we'll also be working with transit partners. We've already met with all of them. And the project team is TJPDC staff, the AECOM consultants, the City of Charlottesville, Albemarle County, and DRPT. So this slide on the top, you can see these are the phases that I just went over. And this again just kind of shows how much engagement we'll have with all of the stakeholders in order to form that consensus. And so what we're looking for are, again, the funding sources, what uses the funding could be used for, and how they would be allocated. And questions?
Any questions?
I guess, when this was attacked back in 2005, it was called the Transportation Working Group. And I'm sure there's a big pile of papers on one of your shelves back there. And it was the decision-making, which was the stuff. We have plenty of options, we could have gone to legislature for different options for funding, but if there isn't going to be decision ability spread amongst the jurisdictions, that nobody was going to buy. So I did not hear that mentioned anywhere, and I just wanted to put that.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments? All right.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that, just for our notes? Supervisor Malik, are you saying that there was no research around who would make the decisions about the funding? Is that what you're saying, or there was no agreement in who would make the decisions?
There was no willingness on the part of the city at that time, and the whole different cast of players to relinquish the total control of who was going to do what.
Okay.
And so that's sort of this city department authority that has, it's quasi-independent or something. And I think the original one is like pictures, but they don't get the medal in the decisions.
I'm sorry. So are you talking about the decisions of like how CAT is administered and CAT services, or the decisions on the funding?
Well, I think if we're looking at transit of all different types, because I assume we're looking at this rather than just what CAT is doing, then that bigger umbrella was what that was. There was an analysis of the 1% sales tax, which we went to I got that by the committees and the General Assembly, daring to come down and ask for money when we hadn't come up with such a thing to do. But it, as I said, the summer block was not where to find the money, it was how to allocate the money.
Sure.
Very good. Any other comments? Thank you very much. Okay, check for number 7 in the long-range transportation plan.
Yeah, we're a little ahead of schedule, so that means if you get out earlier, we can have a really robust conversation around the long-range transportation plan. So I'll leave that up to you guys. So just to give you a little bit of an update on where we are with the long-range transportation plan, I know we don't have a whole estimate in front of you yet, but we have been working on it. So far, based on the recommendation from CTAC, one of the comments they made is that this feels like a really technical document. Maybe we need to think of something else to call it besides long-range transportation plan to get something to get people to feel like they can engage in it. So I'll have a little review for you in just a minute. We did a little activity with our staff and have developed a non-technical name for it. We've developed some draft website content, so I sent that over and we'll hopefully have a draft website set up soon. We procured consultants to provide some technical support for our staff. Again, this is still going to be very much staff driven, but given that we have a small staff, we have the opportunity to get some additional technical support. We were able to procure jointly EPR and Kelly Morris consultants to help advise us through the process. We're about 80% of the way through our demographic analysis based on the 5-year ACS data. There are some data gaps where the data is not available at a block or block group level, so that's something that we're going to continue to monitor, and possibly later this winter or early spring we'll have some better data that we could at least go back and review what those gaps are and see if they provide any additional information that we're not able to glean. We've done a preliminary crash safety data analysis, so we looked at where the major crash incidences are located. I have not gotten back in touch with VDOT, but we should be prepared to run the model pretty shortly. So between the crash data and the modeling, that will give us a pretty good overview of the existing system system operations once we're able to get that information. We've conducted a high-level review of related plans. If you recall, one of the tasks that we were completing was to review other related plans, including looking at other corridor studies, comprehensive plans, small area plans, TDPs. We'll need to reach back out to get the most updated TDPs, but we've been working on going through all of those related documents, including things that are a little bit more adjacent to transportation, not directly related, things like the housing mitigation plan and affordable housing plans and things like that. We've developed the draft goals and objectives for review and conversation, and then based on some consultants' feedback, we have developed some revised public engagement strategies that we're going to review this afternoon. And then in progress, we're still developing our project prioritization through the WIPI grant. So we've been able to incorporate a lot of the feedback that we got through the MPO technical committee and CTAG into developing and refining some of our performance measures. Or metrics that we use. All right, so the big reveal. The name of the long-range transportation plan is moving toward 2050. So we have like this little logo that we've developed, and we hope that this will help make engagement more comfortable and inviting for the general public, make it feel a little bit less technical. All right. So the public engagement process has changed just a little bit from what I presented to you all initially. My initial thought is that we would sort of have the draft goals and objectives and go out for broad public feedback. And that would be a separate expensive public engagement process from then prioritizing the system needs and then going back through and prioritizing the projects. So I restructured this a little bit based on having some discussions with our consultants, which I think will give us more comprehensive public feedback on the draft goals and objectives prior to putting that out before the public at large. And then looking at what some of the other MPOs have done for their long-range transportation plan, it made sense that we could combine the effort to weight the goals against each other, prioritize the various goals against each other, along with collecting the public understanding of what the system needs are in the same engagement process. So instead of doing those as separate processes in order to maintain the overall project timeline, I combine that goal prioritization and need identification into one set of public engagement activities. So that's where we're going to start the broader public engagement efforts based on that feedback. And then moving forward and go through the project prioritization with another set of public meetings and reaching back out to some of those public intercepts and having a public comment period prior to the final public hearing. So there are really 4 different steps in this process, and while these are 4 different phases, that's not to minimize the amount of effort that's going to go into each of those. I imagine that each of these is going to be fairly extensive. So the public engagement strategies, what we talked about is that there are a number of stakeholders that are not engaged through this MPO, through one of the MPO committees that have really important perspectives on the transportation system needs. And so thinking about how this would come across to the public and how it makes sense to sort of get some of this really important stakeholder feedback early enough in the process to have it meaningfully inform the way the rest of the process unfolds. The consultant suggested that it might be helpful to have some really early stakeholder meetings with some key community representatives that can speak from the perspective of some of the different system needs. There were a couple of reasons that they suggested this. One is that it helps us look at how we're framing this through different lenses and make sure that we're capturing all of these different perspectives up front and including all of those needs from the very beginning. The second benefit for developing these stakeholder discussion groups early in the process is that we can use the involvement of some of these representatives to help inform our public engagement process moving forward. So they can provide guidance and insight on how to engage some of the communities that they are involved with as we go through the process. So there were really a couple of different benefits to doing this way. It helps us get some additional perspectives embedded in the process early. And then it helps us also be successful in reaching out to all the populations that we want to reach through the public engagement process. So the idea would be that we will talk about the goals and objectives. We'll have sort of a baseline of the draft goals and objectives, and then we'll start scheduling some of these discussion groups with these stakeholder representatives from the community, and then have a fairly open-ended discussion with them about what they might see as what they like or don't like, or what's missing, or what land doesn't land well. I'll be working to develop sort of that framework for what those discussions will look like with the consultants. Any questions on that before we move forward?
Couple. So I'm looking at the chart that you included in the packet that shows the 5 goals and then the groups down below. It seems, and Sean, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like federal dollars are going to be saying you don't get to put the environment at the bottom of the list. So I guess the point of my question is, when we're asking the general public to prioritize things, I think we should be very careful about what they have the ability to prioritize and what things are already decided by others. And so they don't just get mad, because that really makes people mad really fast, is when you ask them something and then don't pay attention to what they say. And it's not because we don't want to, it's because this is the way that our lives can go. So I hope that that can be thought about when you go forward on this. And also I see in your groups, you pretty well sequestered everybody, but it would be helpful, I think, to have one person from each group listening in on the others, so that there's a better, not necessarily that it sets up debate, but that people can hear what others from other sectors. So, and each of us, I'm sure, will have some suggestions and groups to add to your list, so we can send those in. Thank you.
Well, yeah, well, and we can go through that in a little bit more detail a little bit later, but yeah, I mean, I think that's gonna for the long-range transportation plan. Oh, Mr. Williams, did you have a comment? No, okay. It is how do we want to make sure that our priorities align with, other funding program priorities, or do we want to, develop our own localized or regional priorities and then look for opportunities where there are different philosophies on that. I think that's one of those things we'll probably end up navigating as we go. But my thought through a lot of this is that some of these goals and objectives, and we can talk through this in a little bit more detail as well. There are a lot of these evaluation systems that aren't necessarily confined to the goals and objectives. So something like the environmental considerations are really being assessed throughout, interspersed throughout the goals and objectives themselves. So part of this is how we're grouping these and how we're categorizing these. But some of these things like the land use coordination metrics that we're using also support the environmental goals as well. So that's going to be one of those things that we have to work through is, how we are collecting the information in order to inform exactly how much weight different priorities we'll go through. And that's something that I hope the consultants will help us really think through carefully.
Other questions on this stuff? I'll just make the comment that I know with the regional housing partnerships strategic plan, we did a similar piece. We didn't do discussion groups, but there was a lot of discussion with stakeholders ahead of time. That's probably the first time that I saw the value of going and getting that input. Now, it was a little different because some of it was, well, who the hell is the regional housing partnership or some of these folks. So, at this point, we have somebody go, what's the MPO? And that can be very useful then in your follow-up steps, which is what their point is. So I think I appreciate that this time around. As I had mentioned in a prior meeting, my particular citizen advisory committee, the long-range planning process and how it works and what it is just not, in their brain. It is in Lee, he's on that committee, but he's involved with CTEC. So, he'll help inform that particular group, but a group that's pretty engaged like that isn't even necessarily paying attention to that process, so. Right, well, I think they would be, because they're not necessarily the stakeholders as defined here, I think there is some value in identifying specific stakeholders and getting their input. But then how do you get that in the rest of the, it worked well in the regional housing partnership, so there's somewhat of a blueprint here. If I'm understanding how you describe it.
Sure, and I will say for the CACs or neighborhood associations, those type of things, those would be at the very beginning of the next more broadly public outreach, because I think they can also be ambassadors to, the public, for the public approach to engage. But the first step is really to make sure that we are considering some of these goals and objectives from different lenses that are otherwise represented in the process, are important for the outcome.
So in follow-up, actually, to Chair Dowling, will those conversations begin with, like awareness and education and helping them understand what is the MPO and what is an LRTP before getting feedback from them? So it'll be like information sharing both ways.
Yeah, I think at a minimum, that will have to be the very beginning of any sort of discussion that occurs, and then, and then that could be more extensive. My hope is that we can also build out the website to be informative, but also accessible for people, not to feel like they already need to understand what a long-range transportation plan is in order to understand how to participate, why it's important, and how it affects them.
I've also just endorsed the comment that sometimes the cross-pollination of these groups, I get why you break it down this way from an organizing principle and make it something that's having access to the others, even if it's one round with all four, it's not necessarily a discussion, but giving them the information, letting them respond could be useful there as well.
Mr.
Yeah, so I remember us looking at this 2 months ago. Yeah. So the goals that you have, those are all good goals. It sounds like those are sort of staff's best recommendations, as well as cross-checking or benchmarking or whatever with other planning district commissions. Is that correct?
Yes, and these have also been at least reviewed initially by a CTAC and MPO tech as well.
And then the groups that you're talking about reaching out to, those who like good groups, I can't think of anyone else to add to that. But it sounds like this piece here is really trying to figure out how to engage those stakeholders in the most fulsome, complete way.
Yeah.
Cool.
So then the next step is, it will be like that broader public engagement. So we'll take the draft goals and objectives that will have been reviewed through those stakeholder discussion groups, and then we'll assess what kind of feedback we get, and then we'll have another conversation about finalizing those goals and objectives prior to taking it out generally to the general public. I was hoping that we would potentially be able to do this by our January meeting. I think that's probably going to be a little too ambitious. So I would expect to bring that back to you all in March, given that, a lot of December is going to be difficult to organize around. But I'll get working on it right away. So then the next step is going to be that really big push. So like I said, probably the CACs are going to be one of the first groups that I reach out to start doing some of this awareness. We'll also develop some general public meeting opportunities and look for other public intercept opportunities, as well as conducting a survey online. All of this, of course, will be vetted to the extent possible, but really we just want to make ourselves as available as we can to find the right opportunities to reach as many people, as well as reaching out to the representatives that were participated in the stakeholder discussion groups to help them to help us determine how we can engage with our communities more broadly. So this will be sort of a probably potpourri of different sort of engagement opportunities, and then of course we'll just be tracking the feedback we have very carefully, regardless of what that format looks like. My hope is that we would be able to be moving on this probably pretty soon after we have the goals and objectives and a final state, not to say that they couldn't change, but hopefully that we'll be able to start this probably in April or May. All right, so then the next step will be,
Any questions on the phase 2?
Could you dial back just one, you said something about you expect to start what part of January to be done by March, which is.
the discussion groups, the stakeholder discussion groups.
And then after that, in April comes the refining values, okay.
Yeah, so what we're gonna be doing during this phase right here is we are going to be asking for feedback on, we have all of these draft policy, or all these draft goals and objectives, how important are these relative to each other? How important is it to consider safety compared to equity, compared to the environment, those kinds of things. And that will help us start knowing how much weight to give to these different metrics that we're going to be evaluating as part of our process. And then the other thing we're going to be asking is, instead of going back and doing this analysis as I had originally intended to say, okay, these are the priorities that we've heard from you all, and these are the system needs, we're going to ask for feedback on the system needs before we run the prioritization process. So what that means is that when we get to the point where we are starting to identify and prioritize the transportation system needs, we're going to have two sets of data. We're going to have our quantitative analysis based on the weighted priorities or goals and objectives that we've heard public feedback on. And then we're going to have public feedback on what the public perceives as being the needs. And we're going to be able to look at both of those side by side and see where there might be some overlap and see where there might be some differences in those two approaches. So we'll have two sets of data that will be overlaying together.
I would just offer the CACs, just so we're clear, and I don't know neighborhood association in the city if it equates to, it's the same structure, because our CACs are very defined purpose, so it's a good jumping off point. But HOAs, neighborhood or community associations would still be a area to go after with public engagement, especially since you hear from a lot of our land use decisions get around transportation. But the CACs would not replace that group. I want to be clear. The CAC is a very specifically boundary-driven committee.
Master plan implementation.
Yeah, that squeak keeps going on.
It's the table.
It's the table.
That saving writing on. I was just whispering to figure out. I thought it was the door.
The squeak is.
I'll just write on this table.
Sorry.
I've been, of course, reminds me of National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation.
Yeah.
We're gonna hear it, no, sorry. But I don't want to miss that group. The CAC can be very helpful in getting two other folks to engage in a well-educated group because of what they're doing in advising to the board. But if you went and just said, well, we got feedback from the CAC, I wouldn't check the box of saying you did great public engagement. You also want to go out for
Sure.
which I know you know that's
I don't work in the city, or not just the city, but the city and the county in terms of to Ned's point about trying to get as granular as possible with neighborhood associations or the equivalent of that in the county.
So your neighborhood associations, those are just like a community association, or those specific committees of the city council?
They're not specific committees of the city council. I mean, there's on our website, there's a list of the neighborhoods, who's the chair of like Fry Spring, but it really varies across the city in terms of how engaged and how intentional. And it's also like we're finding with our comp plan, you have some people in a neighborhood association who've been there for a long time, and they'll give feedback that really is not at all in line with the rest of how the neighborhood feels about things. And so it's kind of tricky. I'm assuming guess you've worked with folks in the city before, city staff, in terms of how to at least use that as a starting point to get into the neighborhoods?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say yes, I'll also say that that was largely during the pandemic, so the outreach was a little bit different, but yeah, I'll work with the city as well as, you know, again, I think these, representative groups will also be able to help us know how do we reach those populations, what are the best formats, how those engagements, and then our goal is really just to make ourselves as available as possible to, you know, whoever is interested in trying to be proactive and making sure that, you know, people have an easy opportunity to access.
Yeah.
To join them.
And I brought it up mainly to make sure that the CACs in the county are committees of the board, that they are very specific to geographic boundaries, and not all community associations, HOAs, or other neighborhood associations will fall under a CAC in the county. So you want to make sure you're more inclusive than just going after our CACs. The CACs, you're just going to probably get a different level of engagement from, because they are monthly actively working with staff and supervisors and planning commissioners on an array of topics specific to that defined boundary area.
Could you say a little more about the CAC? What does that stand for?
So it's Community Advisory Committee, and so like, so it's and we have them set up where you have like a large, there's specific categories that your membership's made up of, like a school representative, a business representative, a small neighborhood, a large neighborhood. And the idea is that, so each supervisor has their own stamp on what you do, month in, month out, but mine like keeps a watch list of items that are problematic. So the Belvedere Drive, left-hand turn out of Belvedere on Royal Road, for example, is on the watch list, and that's going through a smart scale application, etc. Bus activity to the center, because the center is within that particular CAC. The Greenbrier Hillsdale intersections in there, so those topics are on the watch list.
That's very interesting.
Land use applications that have a requirement to do a community meeting will often schedule it through the CAC. Because it's on the calendar already, so that they have to satisfy their public engagement piece, they can go to the CAC, members of the public can attend. If nobody does attend, they're at least getting feedback of the people that are on the CAC themselves.
That's interesting.
So, and they do it, and we often have staff, board of supervisor members and planning commissioners and liaisons too, not members of the board. It's obviously it's staffed by the county. So, you know, like I know my particular CAC is giving presentations, conversation with our architectural review boards on entrance corridor requirements, things like that. So, you know, just different presentations. No, I didn't mean to go into that for everybody else. But you're welcome to attend my CAC anytime. I bet. They would love to have you there.
And the president, just as an example, has people from 15 different neighborhoods. Because they're mostly all sort of middle size down there. And a combination of long time residents and really just got here folks. And that's a great place to have active debate.
Happy to discuss more. So,
Thank you. Appreciate that.
all right. Yep.
Okay.
I was just gonna say, we work regularly with all the city neighborhoods because they're in the UVA context, so if I can be helpful in facilitating or clarifying for you, I'd be happy to help.
Oh, thank you, Julie, that's really great.
Can I ask a question back to step one of engagement with the groups that you came up with? If, I know at the end of this, you're gonna be asking for general consensus from the policy board, are we moving in the right direction? If they think of another group that's not accounted for, that can still be added. Okay.
Yeah, these aren't like, but this is.
Yeah, you're not
intended to be
voting to say
included.
this is it.
Yeah,
So if you think of something like, oh, that, then please let us know so we can add that to this list.
I think what I would suggest for Charlottesville is kind of a new group. It's called Livable Seaville. And definitely sort of on the progressive edge of some of these things. And I don't always agree with everything they say, but I think they do a pretty good job of, it's well-informed, thoughtful, advocacy, for the sorts of things that we want to do here. And so I think that's, as opposed to just saying, listen to Twitter or whatever, it's a great way.
Especially these days.
Yeah. Listen to social media. I mean, in other words, that group is it's a thoughtful group that I think is sort of on the leading edge of discussions about density, for example, or bike and ped and so forth.
Yeah.
I don't always agree with them, but they usually make me think.
Yeah.
Well, and sometimes it's important to have those people represented in the process,
Right.
because it's good to hear that early versus later in the
Right.
process, right? So.
Yeah, I think most of what we want to do will be aligned with their goals, not always, but
Yeah.
it's definitely thoughtful.
And Sandy, I was just going to suggest that I think it's great that you demystified the name.
Oh.
You might, in addition to talking about what an RTP is, talk about what it does for them. And if there'd be some way to give concrete examples of what it yields in the long run, it might make it more meaningful. I know for myself, I'm always trying to make that transference of, what is in my head versus what's going to be useful to somebody else. So.
But why should I personally care about it? Yeah, why, how does this affect me? Yeah.
And then when we were having a sidebar, I apologize, but it's person, please, because they relate so much with this.
Thank you. All right. So any other feedback on step 2, phase 2? This will probably be the most substantive and probably the longest phase, just because we want to again be available in as many ways as it makes sense.
So I'm sorry, I don't see car on there. The
Car.
neighborhood association, I would think that could be useful.
Okay.
Are they on there somewhere?
Anyway, that's it's a different sector, but.
We can talk about the structure here. The third phase of public engagement is really going to be about reaching back out to a lot of the people that we heard from in the previous phase and saying, this is kind of what we've done with your comments, and this is what it looks like our project priorities are. Now that we've heard what our overall goals and objective priorities should be, now we know what the system needs are. This is what we've done with it. Give us feedback. Do you agree or disagree that this is the outcomes that should be based on the criteria? Really give a chance for us all to start weighing what the outcomes are of the process that we've been working through against some of the public engagement. I imagine that this is probably where we'll start getting into some more specific granular discussions about specific projects. This might be a fairly iterative process where we start looking at, if we implement this set of projects, what will the outcomes be versus if we look at a different set of potential projects with our priorities. But I want to build that time in to really get a sense of what the public feedback is going to be for the final recommendations, to give us time to have a little bit of back and forth. Probably around this time is when we'll move to monthly meetings with the policy board and the MPO committees to start sort of working through more of the details and having more of an opportunity to have regular conversations about it. But this is really just intended to be a sort of a check-in about what the potential outcomes we could expect based on what our priorities are. Any questions on that? And then the final phase is just the required public hearing. So again, this shouldn't be, we hopefully by the time we get to this point, we've already heard the substantive feedback that we would expect to hear. This is more of just the administrative requirement to approve that LRTP. But there will still be comments for it. This is when the plan will be assembled as a whole and everybody will have a chance to review it. No. Okay. So if you wanted to, this is where you all are going, and so I've been keeping it a little bit, but these are our proposed stakeholder discussion groups. We had a little bit of a discussion with, especially with MPO tech, about whether it made sense to organize these around sort of the type of stakeholder, or whether it made more sense to organize these around, around the types of topics. I think from my perspective, thinking about how to organize these stakeholder discussion groups, you know, the real idea is to have a pretty open-ended conversation. So these aren't going to be necessarily, you know, originally we're calling them focus groups. They're not really focus groups. I don't have specific questions or specific like content I'm trying to get their feedback on. Really, I want to see like what are their general perceptions of the draft goals and objectives that we're putting before them. What kind of feedback do they have? What makes sense to them? What doesn't make sense to them? Those kinds of things. So of course, we'll work to structure and create a framework. But to me, you know, thinking about how this would potentially be facilitated, it made a little bit more sense in organizing these by the type of representative and really going into this saying, like, from a business perspective, these, you know, this is what I see as being something that's missing from your goals and objectives, instead of focusing around, well, the economic development needs that are represented here are this, this, and this. So my hope was that each of these groups would be able to sort of speak to all of the goals and objectives through the lens that they're representing. I hear what you're saying about the cross-pollination of the representatives in these discussions. I think there could be an argument that maybe you don't separate them by the type of representative, and maybe you just, all of them are mixed groups. That could be an option where we're, you know, taking some people from each of these categories and putting them into a different group. That could also be an option. But my goal is really to have to provide a forum to really have sort of an open discussion to hear what kind of insight, what kind of feedback we get. So this would, I mean, I've been writing down your suggestions so far for additional groups to include, and the ones that are asterisk are ones that were added based on the recommendation of MPO TAC or CTAC. So there have been some additions, including the little seatbelt that made it on there. So that's good. That might be TJAC that you're thinking of, yeah.
So this is Blue Ridge Apartment Council, and TJAC is now Blue Ridge Area Coalition for the Homeless. So it's BRAHC. So
Okay.
very similar.
We could add them on there as well.
Okay, no, I was just wondering what ERAC was. I'm sorry.
Landlords.
Oh, okay.
Apartment company.
Ah.
And the special interest might not be the right group for those anyway, but I wasn't sure where else to put them. Yeah, we do have the Charlottesville area line, so we could add Java as well.
That's a lot. Yeah.
And then I'm all gonna come every time.
Right, we don't have commitment from everybody, so we would be reaching out with a request, but the reason there's 4 of them is that we probably want to keep the groups around 8 or so at the most, and so we want to make sure that there's an opportunity to, you know, have these perspectives. We probably need to plan at least 4 sets of meetings, unless a lot of people don't want to participate, then we might have 4.
You have First Baptist Church. Are you referring to the church on West Main or the church? Okay.
Yeah, and they're not listed as a big community, they're listed because they have an important neighborhood connection specifically to the Black community in Charlottesville. They've supported like the transit vision there, we have some contacts with them.
And what about Mount Zion? I think they're pretty connected as well.
We could add them to the list. I don't know if you have a contact there yet, but I can reach out to the city to see who they might.
Or county names up there, Southport would belong in the 3rd bucket as well.
The Mount Zion, I think you just go on their website and you know Reverend Edwards.
Okay.
Right.
Any other feedback either on members or at first, do you all have a strong sense that these should be mixed up? For example,
I mean, my own personal feeling is I'm more interested in making sure we hear from as many of these folks as we can, more than if they are in the same room. I think it could be interesting once you hear from everybody, to let them start reacting to one another. I think that's where
okay,
having them together can be interesting. You get somebody from the business community that starts talking about equity items back and forth, that can be interesting.
so maybe our 2 sets of meetings.
And not to that whatever can be distributed, and then people would be prepared when they came to the meeting. The one thing that I think you mentioned, BDA, economic development, it might be sensible to have city and county reps individually, because that's probably gonna be more concrete as far as working for the LRTPs and the partnerships, essentially the partnerships into recruitment and stuff, but they're not much in process.
Yeah, I actually did reach out to them to get their input on developing this list, but I can ask them if they would also like to be participants on this discussion as well.
You get the individual economic development directors.
If you're looking at safety professionals and you've got police, you've got EMS, you have the fire departments.
I can.
Fire department, the rescue squad, they're the ones who respond to accidents.
Is it a joint fire and EMS department here or this?
Well, Charlottesville has its own fire department, which has a medic
Okay,
unit attached to it. There's also the rescue squad, which is independent.
okay.
I'm not.
So reach out to them.
Well, I'm not quite sure what the lay of the land is in the county. Somebody in the county ought to speak to that.
Start with the fire chief.
Okay,
Yeah, I would say the same thing in the city and stuff.
okay.
Every town, I would see them on that list anywhere, so somebody in that category.
And the fire chief?
No, under the safety professionals, I think that the combined effort of police and mental health people now is, would be a way to perhaps engage someone that's in your safety profession.
Okay. All right,
Medford and JPJ for this.
so any other feedback on this discussion groups before I move forward? Okay. All right, so the next thing that I want to review with you all then is just the draft goals and objectives. And again, these are not intended to be necessarily the final versions. They should be hopefully a jumping off point to have some really good conversations. But I anticipate that these could be adjusted, especially once we have these stakeholder discussion groups. So the first thing I want to start with is just to keep the end product that we're working to develop in mind. So the required outcome of the long-range transportation plan. Not to say this is the only thing that it can do, but the required outcome is that we have a list of prioritized projects that are based on what our estimated funding revenues are going to be for our project. So it's really a list of prioritized projects is the major outcome of this transportation plan that we have to work towards. The goals and objectives are going to inform how we prioritize the different projects. So the goals, when you think of the goals, these are our general value statements. These are the things that are important to us related to our transportation system. And then the objectives are what can be measured, or what does it look like if we start achieving those goals. So you think that safety is a pretty straightforward one. We want a transportation system that is safe. We want to reduce crashes. So what it might look like for the objectives is that we're reducing the number of vehicle crashes and the severity of the vehicle crashes, and then we're also improving the safety and comfort of pedestrian and bicycle related instances. So the objectives are the more specific and measurable outcomes that reflect what it looks like to achieve the goals. And then the metrics are what we use to assess how likely a project is to help us meet those goals. So the metrics are really what we're doing, the quantitative process that we're using to evaluate how well a project or a need is going to help us determine how important a project should be compared to the other projects. So it's possible that as we go through this public engagement, stakeholder engagement process, we might identify some objectives that can't necessarily be quantitatively assessed. And so if that's the case, we want to make sure that we are still considering those in the process, and we'll have to work to develop a methodology to make sure that we're incorporating those considerations into the process. But our hope is that to the extent possible, we'll be able to create quantitative measures in order to help us determine whether a project is going to move us closer or farther away from our desired goals. And this is consistent with the federal movement towards supporting the performance-based project prioritization. This really just gives us a starting point to have a conversation with. So this is going to help us say, like, based on our goals and objectives, when we run this analysis, these are where the important system needs are, and this is how well the projects that we have available to us are going to help us achieve our desired goals. But that doesn't mean that we have to accept what comes out of that quantitative analysis. That just gives us a place to start that conversation, and then we have a larger conversation about whether or not that's the group that we want to move forward. So again, the MPO committees, as we're doing tonight, are going to be vetting the goals and objectives, and then we'll use the stakeholder discussion groups to help us determine whether or not there are things that we're missing or other things that we should be adding to those. So in your packet, this is the list of draft goals and objectives as originally, or not quite as originally, but sort of the starting, the launching out point for what this language is. There were a couple of things that were changed or adjusted based on some conversations with MPO Tech specifically. There was more of an emphasis added to this efficiency goal and objective language to better capture that we're looking not just at roadway efficiency improvements, but also looking at the functional improvements that we want to make to the multi-modal system. So the major goals and objectives, and again, these are based on looking at the previous long-range transportation plan goals and objectives, benchmarking against other MPOs, long-range transportation plans, and then looking at what some of the emphasis areas have been from the local, state, and federal planning processes that have occurred since the last long-range transportation plan. And so these are the 5 goal categories that we pulled out and developed as a launching point for a discussion. That includes safety, that includes the environment, equity and accessibility. That one is really measuring access to jobs, and as Lucinda mentioned earlier, jobs also sort of can be a proxy for access to opportunities and services that are needed. Then there's the land use and economic development, which is measuring how well different projects will help connect to other important community features. So this is going to be measuring whether a project is going to support land use planning and having connection in sort of these areas where there are more community assets that people want to function. So things like, I don't think healthcare is listed, but things like grocery stores and parks and libraries and schools and things like that. So to help sort of with that land use coordination piece. And then the efficiency is measuring how reliable the system is operating. Any questions or comments or initial feedback on these goals and objectives? Yes.
There's a long list of projects that we've been carrying from LRTP to LRTP. Where do those get highlighted? Things on the vision plan that was already said we want, we just haven't gotten there yet. How does that fit in?
Yeah, so we'll get to that. We're going to go through this like draft goals and objectives process, and then we're going to prioritize where the system needs are. So the first thing we do after we prioritize the system needs is we're going to look at what are the projects that have already been developed and where's the overlap between projects that are developed and where our most important safety or system needs are. And that's going to help us give us a starting point for which projects we want to start with, evaluating to start working towards a constrained project list. It's possible that we might identify some really important system needs that we don't have any sort of pipeline projects in place for. And so that will help point us towards, well, we're not ready to prioritize this project, but we really need to prioritize studying, this area or developing some solutions to this area. So I can see that this was probably going to be divided into two different paths.
Just going to say on the first one, I hear and appreciate the quantitative, going after the quantitative. But your objective under safety, improved comfort. Comfort is a very subjective qualitative thing. And just because I would be comfortable with a four-way stop doesn't mean I'm going to get a warrant analysis that allows me a four-way stop. Because I could pick out a lot of places in my district alone where people would be more comfortable and feel more safe with things that we're not going to get. Because the quantitative data says no. So just be careful of that. If you're really going after the quantitative here, then, measuring comfort and how do we say that we've now improved comfort when people are going, you didn't give me what I want. Let's not even set that dynamic up from the get-go.
And if you're focusing on safer places to ride a bicycle, commuting to work, which is then even just improving safety, will cover and keep you out of trouble.
Sure.
But that means, I think on these objectives, it was clear to me that these are just suggestions to get us going through the process. We may have a whole different set or a more nuanced set of objectives by the time we go through the almost.
Yeah, the other thing, and this just occurred to me after the MPO tech meetings and CTAC meetings. The other thing I was thinking about is I think there might be a desire to highlight some of these things that are interwoven throughout a lot of these that maybe aren't clear. Just looking through this list of goals and objectives. So for example, to Supervisor Malik's point earlier, I think there might be some things that we want to pull out as guiding principles that are saying overarching to the extent that, we are considering how environmental considerations can be integrated with any of these other metrics or project evaluation processes that we're using. Same thing with, equity. It might make sense to pull this out and say, there's equity. Equity is being considered throughout the way all of these other measures are occurring, not just, within that one line item. So I don't want to start with that necessarily. I want to wait till we hear feedback, but I think that might clarify some of the issues or the potential concerns that you all are bringing up. Any other initial feedback?
With our transportation, this Secretary of Transportation, the names, I'm lost his name right at the moment, is he gave a presentation at VACO, and maybe I just heard that he didn't sound too high on bike lanes because of the cost of bike lanes. And putting aside, I think, some of the initial reactions to that, I think a bigger point that maybe we're thinking about as we go through this, I see in this community, if we go out and go, hey, bike lanes, everyone's like, yes. But if you put bike instead of bike, and I'm thinking of the cost increase that we need to get to when we think of our bike ped bridge and the explosion of the costs there. That if folks are talking about priorities of what they would want, it's real easy to go on with this and with this and with this and with this. But when you start giving them a cost per mile, well, they might, bike lane be their number one, they might say, well, wait a minute, per the cost given, I'd rather have number three. So I would hope that's a level of conversation we could perhaps get at. The transportation secretary's comments aside, the bigger point is per mile, what can you get with the competition of dollars can change how somebody thinks of what their priorities are when they're thinking about actual projects that get put into place. If that makes sense.
We did the trade-offs on the vision plans. We talked about, you want this, you have to give up that.
Yeah. That might be something we can integrate into a survey, or maybe something that maybe there's a separate round, but I'll think about how, we'll talk through maybe how we can present that information.
Well, some communities, what they do is they get people to budget, like so many dots. And you only have so many dots to take the projects you want. So it's kind of going to your point, if you really want the bike head thing, it's gonna take all your dots, you might not want to put all your dots in one place.
Right.
Not that kind of dot, just stick a dot.
Well, and it's important to Supervisor Mallory's point of not setting up the public to do this work. Which they will take, those who engage will take it seriously. To have them identify their priorities, but then none of them make it in, it's like, well, then why didn't we follow ourselves? We have to be mindful of that so that we don't set them up to feel disenfranchised after investing time and effort into something that we want them to be invested.
Yeah.
Which I know you do.
Well, that is one of our goals for the public engagement, is that we can make sure that any opportunity we have to get public engagement, there's a clear way that is incorporated into, what kind of decisions are being made forward.
I think the consultants could be helpful in us trying to
Yeah.
figure that stuff out.
Piling on to Mr. Brick's suggestion, similar to the evaluations for restaurants where you have $1, $2, $3, and $4. Yeah, it seems like that should be applied to these choices, because in this room, some number of years ago, I don't think any of the rest of us, maybe Michael was here, there was a group who came in and basically took over the whole job process. They had hundreds of people who all came, and they had not been to anything else, the whole series, and it was just a fiasco.
Sure.
So, figuring out a way to calibrate that so that you actually get a bona fide, reasonable suggestions that you can use, as opposed to just somebody's Santa Claus list, will be really helpful for you all,
Sure.
all of us.
On the plus side, I'm impressed that hundreds of people wanted to come participate in the long range strategic plan. Standing room only. Any other feedback on this? All right, so just so you all know, our immediate next steps then will be to start scheduling the stakeholder discussion groups, and then one of the other suggestions from the consulting team was to start with reviewing previous public engagement that's related to the transportation plan, see what questions have already been asked, pull in the information that is applicable, and then we can make sure that we're not duplicating any previous efforts. Any other questions or comments?
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
To the next item, number 8, smart scale project review.
Yeah, this isn't really something that I have a very specific request for, but I'm gonna say I just wanted to make sure that you all had a chance to see these project cost estimates prior to the CTB meeting in January to develop the staff recommended projects to be funded. So the important thing to think about through these project cost estimates that were developed through Smart Scale is that we're really, when we were talking about a lot of these projects, we're really talking about the base cost estimates. Because the economy being what it is, and because of the complexity of some of these projects, there ended up being some pretty high contingencies and inflation costs that were added to this project, which did increase the final price tag pretty significantly. For some of these projects, we'll just have to wait and see what the evaluation looks like, what the scoring looks like, and what this looks like across the state, because these cost estimate inflationary factors should relate to pretty consistently, should be applied to all the projects. So what this means is that we probably won't get very many projects funded this round, and hopefully we can use whatever feedback we do get based on the outcomes to inform and refine our scripts for projects moving forward. But there might also be a desire or a discussion we want to have about whether or not there are opportunities to get some phases or some work of these projects funded separately in order to move the project forward, specifically thinking about the Rivera River Viking pedestrian bridge. One of the reasons the final project cost was so expensive for this one is because it's a complicated project, and we don't have a lot of neat answers to some of the questions that, as you all discussed, prior to submitting the Smart Scale application. So this could be an opportunity where we want to look at whether or not there might be another federal grant opportunity that we want to pursue, since we've done a significant amount of work to try to get some of this design work or answer some of those questions before we apply or resubmit for another application with Smart Scale, so that we can reduce some of the unknown information and hopefully reduce some of those contingency costs. It could also be that we want to look at how this project can be phased out separately, that there are some potential options to do that. But I think as we move forward, there are two things to keep in mind. When we talk about our project cost estimates for any of our long-range transportation plan, we want to make sure that we're also factoring in that there's going to be some additional costs besides just the base cost estimates as we're developing our constrained budget and our list of projects. And the other thing to keep in mind is that we want to make sure that we're being really thoughtful about the scope of projects, because the more specific and the more, I guess, like refined or contained we can be with our project scope, the less variables there are that have to be factored in, and the better chance we have of keeping the project costs sort of contained to what we really need the project to accomplish.
A couple of, so PE is the engineer, RW is the right of way, CE is construction.
Yes,
Yeah,
correct.
CI is construction and inspection costs, construction engineering inspection costs.
So the base cost estimates were put together by y'all.
I think a lot of these came out of preliminary studies or other studies initially, and then were reviewed by VDOT to get a revised cost based on, whatever their estimates were for the specific project.
The concept of it's further refined at the beginning of that pre-app period.
Okay, so just to kind of put a perspective on that for everybody, the department instituted and established a contract cost estimation office in January of 2021. After some heartaches and some issues with other projects that had come up where estimates were busted. Right. I've lived through some of those pains. So we have a good documented system of how we go about developing these estimates, and a big part of it is risk-based contingencies. On some of these projects, in particular, projects that have bridges, if you don't have borings, we don't know what we have to build a foundation. So we are applying risk to these projects based on what we know at the time, and quite frankly, in a whole other planning studies, we don't get some of the information we need to develop good estimates without that risk associated with it. The inflation in Chuck and Stacy and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, the inflation was applied automatically in the Smart Scale pool in the application process. So that is done consistently across the state. The contingencies should also be done consistently across the state, because we now have a documented process. As long as those engineers are looking at these projects objectively to make sure that the risk is being identified, you should see numbers like this across the state.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's helpful. Thank you. So often with the work that I'm in, we will include contingencies which are to partly cover cost escalation and inflation, but it sounds like you've got contingencies based off like risks having to do with unknowns, lack of data, just uncertainty. But you've also put another factor on the just raw inflation on top of that.
Based on when the project is potentially going to add.
And so I think to your point, other jurisdictions, municipalities are going to be facing the same kind of thing. I think this is going to affect everyone. And so,
But
I don't think that happens.
where I think we can get better, and what this shows me, honestly, is that some of these projects really weren't ready.
It seems to me your risk aversions is almost as much as the base project. Seems to me a preliminary engineering study might abate some of that. But we're gonna go ahead and ask for all this money We don't know.
That's what I just kind of saying, like, if the project may not have been fully ready during the planning study, you get certain aspects of it, but you don't get some borings would have went a long way.
So maybe we should have a PE study before we submitted the application.
Or at least, or maybe even added that as a part of the study to capture that information.
Yeah, that
once
was
you
good.
knew
That was
what-
a good idea, because your 50% of your cost is unknowns.
In our normal project development, these risks are drawn down over the life cycle of the project. So as we go out and get additional borings and get additional information, estimate will go down. But for all of us in this room, if you don't ask for enough to cover it based on what you know, who's on the hook for that? When you get awarded the money and you start to figure out that, hey, guess what? 18.8 isn't enough.
So this is a newer methodology that you're doing here in terms of your.
And in the past, and Stacy will mean, we had this issue in the town of Warrenton where a revenue sharing project, which is a 50-50 match between the department and locality, an estimate went in that was a traffic engineering study estimate that did not go through the right disciplines to review an estimate, and it was just put in the portal. They got accepted the funding, and we get into it, and now we're like, was it $8 or $9 million more?
Yeah, more than double.
Well, like our bridge.
So what happens in that circumstance? You cut the project or you give them money?
So they were funded in the first time they applied for funds, they got almost all of what they requested. And now they have insufficient funds to cover the whole project, so it's essentially stalled. And so
Oh, okay, so VDOT says you gotta get this.
either
Well, if there's an-
rescope or apply again.
And there's an agreement that states if there's any cost overruns, then
They gotta, yeah.
There. And I think it's important to note too that, the old pre-smart scale way of developing projects is that we started with a throw something up against the wall budget that wasn't expected to cover everything. So we often were funded only for PE or only maybe for PE and right of way. And we did that scoping, to your point, that scoping process happened after a project was identified and funded and actually in our program. And we were then able to assess what those risks were and, ask for additional funds from our CTV. But now this process and the ability to look at projects without some of the political subjectivity piece of it means that we're doing a lot of that scoping up front before there's even the ability to fund that. I mean, where do you even get the funds to do the borings and all of that? We're sort of in this, this catch-22 right now of how do you fund all of that? And that's, maybe to your point, Sandy, about doing some work outside of this process to get ready.
And correct me if I'm wrong, with that old process worked, they could start projects, it took them a while, there was a lot of money spent on engineering projects that when they got to the scope, wasn't something they really wanted to do, or
Yeah, it
the
took-
projects were parts they funded
forever.
sat for a long time.
forever to get done.
So it had its own problems of front loading too much, so you gotta find a new balance.
But I think we're in a unique situation here. Out of that cost estimating office, they've taken a tool that was developed in Culpeper District for conceptual design estimates. They literally took a workbook that staff in Culpeper District developed to utilize statewide as a tool. So we've got good resources. We just need to continue to work closely together and looking at round 6. If there's things that we want to do, let's start having the conversations now to make sure we can get this risk down as much as possible. So when our estimates come in, everybody is confident that we've got a good estimate to move forward.
What does it cost to do the boring that's necessary? It is.
Depends on the project.
Oh, it's an access.
For the river, like $1,000 a drill site, maybe something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to talk to our materials people to figure out. I mean, it's not like we actually have people that can do that work too. We just,
Probably like $20,000.
yeah.
Well, there's probably other parts of the design you want to nail down too, right?
But I mean, in particular, I think the biggest one here is the bridge. I mean, if you've got a bridge, that's a big unknown. So for most of our work, we don't really need a whole lot of that. Well, for that project, a whole lot of that work was done up front through some, and it was a design build also. So they're designing it and building it all at the same time. He was talking about the hot lanes through the, right, I'm thinking you're talking about the hot lanes coming to Frederick Road.
No, I'm talking about this bridge, the Right Hand River Bridge, like pedestrian crossing.
Yeah, I mean, without having the geotechnical information, some type of geotechnical information, it's kind of hard for us to limit that risk.
And without an alignment, or without alignment here, right? That's the other piece of it.
We had that.
We
We just didn't have the warrant, the geotech to go with it, which
Yeah.
was supposed to be part of the first thing. The dilemma that I remember is that it's a tug of war between spending $100,000 of locality money in the beginning to get this information. Or when you find out even there's a possibility of getting funded by the big boys upstairs, and then you go back and do it. Then, which is what we've done with East Grand Bridge, we went back and said, okay, we're gonna have to refine our design and everything to get a better price.
Yes, that makes total sense when it comes to the bridge. I'm a little surprised that with the District Avenue roundabout, this is one over by the theater.
Right.
So I understand 10% for engineering contingency. And then you've got 30%, no,
So you've got
40% for right of way contingency. Then you've got 50% for construction. I wouldn't have thought there'd be that much risk involved in that in terms of like site conditions and things like that. And I can see the inflation on the bottom.
Well, I think your construction cost and risk there is probably with management of traffic. And right of way, some of the access issues that you may encounter there could be part of the risk. With me, I haven't looked at these, that's what I would guess, why those numbers are the way they are.
Okay, but that's based on some sort of methodology that the whole
Yes.
district, so it's not just someone's pulling something out of their.
No.
But I mean, to Mr. Krebs' point earlier, what happens with these things is you don't do projects. Because you have the contingency, the risk that you're trying to cover with contingency, and then the potential for inflation, and then before you know it, from a $1 million project to a $20 million project, so. What happens after this? In other words, this goes to somebody at the state and they.
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna get scored. So, I mean, they had a presentation today at the CTV talking about which projects went through validation and were moving forward. Out of the state, there were 411 total applications with a total of $7.6 billion in requests.
And what is
How much money is
validation?
available?
What was that?
How much money is available?
I don't know how much was from.
Not 7.6 billion.
No.
When you have these factors, in, so there's actually $14 billion.
I think there's around, if I recall, there's around 29 million in our district fund. So there are two different funds. There's the Culpeper district has its own fund for certain types of projects. None of the projects that MPO submits are eligible for it, but that gives you an idea for all of Culpeper district, there's around, like somewhere around $29 million.
So the next, you mentioned the word validation, has these been validated?
Yes.
So y'all done your bid, and then it's been submitted to someone to be validated, and then we'll wait to see how the scoring turns out?
The score will happen in January.
I see, okay.
I believe by our next policy board meeting in January, the CCP should have already received the staff report on the recommended funding based on their analysis. So we may be able to have a discussion about it and where the outcomes are.
Would a community do better on cost if they did all that upfront work? I mean, would you not?
So here's the
If they
question
had
I have to
more-
ask the room. If it's a beneficial project and it's something you want, then yes. If you've
I
got,
would score better.
well, you would have bought down the risk, you would have assumed some of that cost, which I've heard localities say they can do it cheaper than us. And if you can develop a project through people cheaper than us and get you a great estimate, all for it, and we'll try to fund the right away in construction. And it's not a full set, you don't have to go a full set of plans, get 30%.
even that is a significant amount of money for Charlottesville anyway.
I mean, if you reduce that risk by half, you might be in a better position to get your project. And certainly the cost of that upfront work isn't gonna be $4 million, you know. It's-
Yeah, but if you say like the 1.7 for the district grant, just using that one, you know, if we had to spend, I don't know, a quarter of that, what is that, $400,000 on, it was split between the county and the city, 200,000, that's actually, yeah, that's right on the border. Each of us would be investing like $200,000 to get a really good set of plans that can be then maybe the net result is all of our risk goes down, we can score better.
Right.
That's the kind of trade-off you're talking about. I don't know that we have that kind of funding available.
But there was also buying down the cost of the project, right, paid for, these a portion of one of the phases too.
Sure.
That's considered a contribution.
Yeah.
Helps your cost benefit ratio.
Sure.
I mean, Albemarle, the last round through, contributed significant dollars to some of the projects. I mean,
That's
Can
something
be
we
done.
should think about. in the city.
And it's not this, and we can help with that.
I'll also mention that, well, you know, it's unlikely that we'll get all these projects funded. We were very successful with previous rounds and getting a lot of sort of, you know, pipeline projects that have been sitting on our list moved forward. So I think this is just really good information to help us know how to be successful in future rounds. But we've still been successful at leveraging the smart scale resources well in the past, and this is probably a conversation that is happening in MPOs throughout the state right now.
Well, I'm personally very grateful that DDOT has taken the leadership to make sure that there is sort of fair documented approach through all jurisdictions, because that was some hard work. We don't ever need to go through it again to see how that was, used to be playing out. So that's great. It's getting better for everybody.
So I have two basic questions. So the methodology for the contingencies is just a flat percentage of the amount?
It's risk-based, so we've got an entire manual that talks about how you calculate this risk-based contingency based on the type of project and the risks that are associated with the project.
So for right away, for example, how is that just a flat?
I don't think it's a flat, I think it's just based on the situation, and then our right-of-way engineers work with us to figure out what that risk should be.
there's a range based on the complexity of the project. So more complex, you might be at a higher in the contingency range. Simpler project, lower end, and then there are other elements that can raise or lower that number. So let's say you're at 30% on a fairly simple project, you might go up or down for certain elements that are of risk.
And I mean, I guess one thing too is all the documentation for these estimates have to be uploaded into the portal. So that documentation that is there, that is developed, that came from these estimates is uploaded in the portal with the application.
And then I guess one last thing is the cost estimation office is sampling 10% of all projects and looking at our estimates and trying to find places where we maybe missed something and or trying to norm between the rest of the states.
So this manual that explains the methodology, which sounds very exciting.
You don't want to read.
That's why I go in here and explain it to us.
But if you all would like to have a special presentation on estimating, we can get somebody.
But your question is, can you see the document, can you get a link? We can get you some.
I mean,
I've got it up now.
part of trying to understand this well enough to then turn around and explain it to folks, that is what it takes for me to help try to understand it. So my next question is kind of play out a real world scenario here, how the base cost, I mean, inflation ultimately is just base cost. So I appreciate this being broken, not here, it's dealing with these different inflation numbers. But using this scenario of how it was built in and accounted for, can you use the, you ran into the runaway truck issue with the Crozet Road project. That sounds to me like to correct and do the brake ramps and whatever.
Yeah, the truck arrest system.
That sounds to me like a contingency that would have come up. So was the contingency funds used to pay for that contingency?
There were no contingencies. That was a different set of funds to address that issue that everybody agreed it was the right thing to do.
But it wasn't smart scale, is that what you
We use ASAP funds for that. What's that?
The whole, yeah, the project.
To pay for the whole project.
No.
The additional.
So the contingencies, there were no contingencies.
There were, but it was not enough to account for the additional work that was needed for that.
So that would be a case like, if you run it through here, there was a contingency number attached to it, it just wasn't enough to cover the contingency that popped up.
Because it was not a risk that was even,
Thought.
yes.
So then the reverse to Mr. Craig's point is that the worst case scenario, you would hope the contingency monies end up being a lot less.
Yes, and like I indicated before, as you go through the project development process, that contingency goes down as you have more knowns.
There was monies left over for the Hillsdale connector from hydraulic up to through there. Is that how that had leftover monies, that there was unused contingency funds?
Potentially. I mean, we do have on certain projects where we don't use contingency funds and it just goes back into the pot.
Because we had the opportunity to retain some of that, so it wouldn't just go back in, but it'd still be easier when that was applied to another project here.
On our list.
And there was a time frame, I remember, a deadline, when you had to apply.
That was revenue sharing, I believe.
So
Yeah,
that's a-
there's a 6-month window after the completion of a project, that if that locality makes the transfer onto another revenue sharing project, the state funds, not just the locality's money, but the state funds can go with it.
So it wasn't.
Otherwise, no, that was not small scale.
So how you use you budget, you get awarded 42 million for a bridge, you only need 35, and 7 million just goes back into next year.
Yes,
Yeah.
so this would be, if these projects would be high priority projects, and it would go back into a statewide pot. If it's a county project or a city project that's funded through the district grant program, it comes back into the Culpeper pot. That's available for either overruns on other projects or for the next round.
So we didn't have a discussion, previous folks used to call it the billion here, a million there to put something together.
Yeah.
And after years, we used leftovers from Frederick Parkway, which was a perfect example of what Michael was saying, you should put in 1.5 million for 15 years, and finally get to build the road.
That's right.
Any questions or comments here? We went from being well ahead to.
Glad we had extra time available.
Well, thank you. Is there any final things there, Sam?
Yeah.
All right, then the next item, number 9, our roundtable updates. And why don't we give I'll just go around the room. Christine, any updates you want to provide? Julia? No updates? Would you like to give us a second?
Actually, a couple of things.
Yes.
So some projects that we've been working on, we submitted a reconnected communities grant application through MPHWA recently, and we can find out in January or February. That's been funded. We are doing some conceptual design work for a project that we've been interested in, the 3 Bridge Lane project, to explore transitioning that roadway to either one-way southbound traffic only or closing it to vehicles entirely. We have 2 concept ideas from our consultants, and we're going to be taking those to the campus CAC in January. And then I can just briefly speak about our comp plan. We're wrapping up phase 1 and we're moving into phase 2, and there's going to be a presentation to the board soon in January.
Gentlemen? Any updates? And you may have to introduce yourself.
I think the biggest update is probably just me.
Sam
Chambers, I'm the transportation planning manager for the city. Just started last month, so. Good to meet you.
I'm just wondering who you were.
Yeah, so I'm the new guy, don't have a ton of updates as substantive as justice, but yeah, will be part of the transportation planning in a new way at the city.
Your expectations will be high. Around Mr. Nelson.
250, 151 roundabout is open. I haven't heard any issues thus far, so that is a good thing. Still working on the truck arrest ramp, trying to get that thing finalized so that we can start to work on that. The right of way was going well, so that's a good thing. We'll probably have that project finished up this spring because the paving is going to stop us from completing this winter. On the DDI, it's not in the final configuration. So I know we've had issues with traffic through there coming through Pantops. We've tried to adjust the timing as much as possible, actually employing some drones to try to help us look at where the traffic is to help us time the signal a little bit better. Contractors hoping to try to get up there and pave this week to try to get the additional lanes open to be at full capacity based on the weather that it's looking like. It does not look like that's going to happen. So as soon as we can find a window to pave at night, we will do that to try to get those lanes back open so that things can flow through that area a little bit better. And then last thing, the hydraulic bundle, their proprietary meetings for the shortlisted firms on this Thursday. Hoping to work through that to have that contract awarded so that we can start to work on that design build project.
Truck restaurant, is it above Turnpike Road or where it comes? The old country.
It's above that. It's above that. Yeah.
Let's continue around, shall we?
I've been working on Smart Scale. I think we've talked about that enough.
Nothing from me.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Good week. And any updates over there?
No,
sir. Hang in there. We're going to the screen. Mr. Williams, Garland, any updates today?
No updates today.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Condor, anything from CTAC?
No, nothing from CTAC.
Thank you, sir. And
What is on the agenda?
oh, Mr. Hudson, I didn't see his name. Any updates, Mr. Hudson?
Sure, I have a couple quick updates. First off is the DRPT grant season opened December 1st and will close on February 1st. This includes our capital, operating, technical assistance, demo project, and intern/workforce programs. Our TAM plan is available online through our DRPT's open data portal. All MPOs should have received revised transit asset management performance targets for inclusion in the TIP and STIP. Well, not STIP, excuse me. On the TIP front, MPOs should be working closely with transit agencies, in this case, CAT and JAUNT, on identifying transit projects for the new updated TIPs. If there are questions about the TIPs, please reach out to me in this case, if it's a transit project. And that is all I have. I think the room has been muted. We can't hear you guys online.
There you go. Can you hear us now, Wood?
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
I got nothing to add.
Very good. Councilor Nixon? No, nothing to add. Supervisor Malik, can you?
I drove one leg over the Belmont Bridge, so you're making progress.
That's right.
Good, thank you. No, I have to separate from this, is it?
And I do appreciate the update from the 124, the construction going on over there, because yeah, they're stuff happening right there right now. And in the county, we are, as I imagine, this is the same with the city, gearing up for budget time, CIP projects, operational, and all that. So we have a joint meeting with our school board tomorrow. So I know we'll all go away for the holiday, but come back in the midst of budget time. Are there any updates, Sandy? Any others from? Great. And then No items added to the agenda. Will be one last call, matters from the public. Any additional comments or takers for public comment? Neil, Sean? All right, we will close matters from the public. That, our next meeting date will be January 25th,
2023, yes.
2023. Wow.
Oh,
Well,
man, I feel old.
I hope you all enjoy a wonderful holiday and a happy new year, and I will take a motion to adjourn. For a second.
Second.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, very good. Nice job. Thank you.
Then what was that date?
The date, the 25th, January 25th.